Trying to predict the future is a discouraging and hazardous occupation because the prophet invariably falls between two stools.
In 1921, a quiet Swiss teacher named Paul Amadeus Dienach slipped into a coma and woke up not just fine, but forever changed. What followed were revelations that seemed too extraordinary to believe. He spoke of advanced technologies, humanity's ventures into space, and a world transformed by spiritual evolution, visions that eerily align with our reality today. But how could a man from the 1920s describe innovations decades, even centuries, ahead of his time? Was it a gift of foresight, a result of his subconscious mind, or something far stranger? As his story unfolds, the line between fact and fiction begins to blur. Dive into this gripping tale of mystery, technology, and humanity's destiny. You might never look at the future the same way again. The Mysterious Coma of Paul Amadeus Dienach. In 1917, a young Swiss teacher named Paul Amadeus Dienach experienced an extraordinary and inexplicable event. He suddenly fell into his first coma after a brief illness. Despite thorough medical examinations, doctors found no physical explanation for his condition. This coma lasted for 14 days, leaving his friends and family in a state of panic. When Dienach finally awoke, his recovery was swift and seemingly complete, with no lingering effects. Life appeared to return to normal, and this strange episode was dismissed as a rare medical anomaly, until it happened again 4 years later, in May 1921. This time, however, the coma was far more severe, lasting an entire year, and setting the stage for one of the most bizarre stories in recorded history. During his second coma, Dienach's body showed no significant signs of illness beyond weakness from prolonged inactivity. Tragically, his mother, who had been his closest companion, passed away while waiting for him to wake up. When he finally regained consciousness in May 1922, he seemed physically fine but profoundly changed in demeanor. Dienach became deeply withdrawn, speaking little to anyone except his priest and immersing himself in philosophical and spiritual studies. This was particularly peculiar, given that he had been skeptical of religion before his coma. Something had clearly happened to Dienach during his year-long unconsciousness, though he was reluctant to share details about what he experienced. Dienach's post-recovery reputation rested firmly on his ability to predict events far off in the future. He was talking about things that would not happen for possibly decades or even centuries. He foretold of a handheld computer-like iPad, made predictions about attempts the human race would undertake to colonize Mars, and issued dire warnings about nuclear war, all when World War II and nuclear technology were utterly unthinkable concepts. All these statements left the audience around him dumbfounded, for they held no explanation and implied an extraordinary knowledge beyond scientific understanding of his time. The coma mystery remains unsolved to this day. The experiences are now left in the minds of those who dared to listen, whether a product of great imagination, profound neurological phenomena, or something far stranger. Dienach's life, cruelly ended in 1924 by tuberculosis, was full of great enigmas and captivating tales. His diary, later published by his disciple Georgios Papachatsis, continues to ignite debates and discussion on consciousness, time, and human faculties. But what if his coma wasn't just a medical mystery? What if it unlocked a window to a future no one could have imagined? A glimpse into the future. Paul Amadeus Dienach's account of his coma experiences remains extraordinary, particularly because of the detailed predictions he made about the future. Upon waking from his year-long coma, Dienach began to share visions of a world far beyond his time. He spoke of a handheld device capable of displaying images and producing sound, a description eerily similar to today's tablets, such as the iPad. He also described flying vehicles and technological advancements that mirrored ideas like holography and advanced transportation systems. For someone living in the 1920s, these concepts were nearly inconceivable, making his predictions all the more astonishing. One of Dienach's most startling claims was his vision of humanity colonizing Mars. He predicted that by the year 2024, humans would have established a colony on the Red Planet, with its population growing to over 22 million within 60 years. Tragically, he foresaw that a catastrophic impact event would wipe out the Martian colony, deterring humans from attempting to colonize other planets for centuries. This vision of space exploration and disaster paints a vivid picture of both humanity's potential and its vulnerabilities in the face of cosmic forces. Dienach also foresaw the forthcoming global cataclysms that find place in the time span of the 20th and 21st centuries: environmental problems, overpopulation, and disastrous international wars. He foresaw a medium-scale nuclear conflict that would last for 80 years, and Europe would undergo massive destruction. Only the Baltic and Scandinavian countries would show relative safety, which he associated with the language's future development along the lines of Anglo-Scandinavian influences. He claimed that these wars would lead to a global decline in population and coercive restructuring by humans in order to preserve whatever semblance of a societal and governance system may exist. By the 24th century, yet another world government would appear, one that would hold great promise, but soon after become derailed by corruption, triggering revolts. These visions of Dienach look further into an immaterial and intellectual evolution among other social calamities. He maintained that human beings would make that transition from a scarcity economy to an adequacy economy, whereby human beings worked for the well-being of all and not for personal enrichment. By the year 3000, humanity would undergo the so-called Neville Birch, an immense spiritual transformation that would furnish human beings with heightened abilities of collective consciousness. This event would so radically alter human nature that laws and governance would become obsolete, since human beings will be living in harmony and cooperation. In the meantime, there are skeptics who genuinely deal with the probabilities of the vision, yet many correspondences have been drawn between its forecasted events and happenings associated with modern scientific and social progress that provide a platform for an arena of speculation on the actual source of knowledge Dienach had. Philosophical and spiritual transformation. Post-coma. After waking from his year-long coma in 1922, Paul Amadeus Dienach underwent a profound philosophical and spiritual transformation that puzzled those who knew him. Before the coma, Dienach was a skeptical, intellectually curious teacher with a deep passion for history and language, but not particularly inclined toward religion or spirituality. Following his recovery, however, Dienach withdrew from social interactions, becoming reclusive and introspective. He spent his days immersed in manual labor and his evenings studying philosophy and religious texts. This shift in his character was stark and unsettling, particularly to those familiar with his more pragmatic and skeptical personality before the coma. One of the most curious aspects of this transformation was Dienach's newfound relationship with religion. Prior to his coma, he had been openly skeptical of religious doctrines, yet upon waking, he sought frequent counsel with his priest. Dienach hinted that he had gained knowledge during his coma that transcended traditional religious teachings. He reportedly told his priest that there were profound truths about the afterlife and spirituality that even the clergy were unaware of. However, he remained cryptic about what these revelations were, refusing to elaborate further, which only deepened the mystery surrounding his experience. Dienach's writings post-coma showed a growing concern about time, reality, and human consciousness. He seemed tormented by existential questions regarding life's purpose and the interrelationship of all things, themes that would later surface in his detailed accounts of the future. His new soul-searching inclinations led him to consider mankind's great hope for growth and enlightenment. He entertained the optimistic view that the human race could spiritually grow despite being aware of countless conflicts and hardships. The vision of a spiritually transformed humanity further implies that Dienach held that his experiences were mere glimpses of the ultimate destiny of humankind. These philosophical spiritual transformations not only affected Dienach's personal life, but also gave rise to his unique prophecies and memories, be it profound hallucination, neurological phenomenon, or something beyond comprehension. Whatever was accounts have certainly stamped an indelible impression on his writings and the accounts he handed down. Dienach's shift from a skeptical outlook toward a deeply spiritual way of viewing would enhance the magnitude of his own experience and raise further speculations on whatever it is that he may have witnessed during his time in the coma. Time travel to 3906. One of the most extraordinary claims made by Paul Amadeus Dienach following his year-long coma in 1922 was his vivid account of waking up in the year 3906. According to Dienach, he found himself in the body of a man named Andreas Nordom, residing in a futuristic society that was technologically and spiritually advanced. The environment he described was filled with crystal structures, floating cities, and advanced medical facilities. where he learned that Nordum had been revived after a fatal accident. Dienach's realization that he was not in his own body, but in a different man's body in a distant future, led him to a profound identity crisis, pushing him to question the nature of reality itself. Dienach's account of the year 3906 also included descriptions of advanced technology, such as the Reigen Swag, a device that projected images and sounds, akin to a modern-day iPad. He described towering mansions, floating observatories, and synthetic marble-lined lakeshores in the supercity of Norfolk. His observations of the people in this future society revealed a community that had transcended materialism, valuing art and science over wealth, and operating under a governance system run by thinkers, humanitarians, and scientists rather than oligarchs. This vision of a utopian future starkly contrasted with the early 20th century world Dienach had known before his coma. Equally amazing was the aspect of spiritual evolution of mankind in Dienach's futuristic vision. He retold the events of the Neville Birch, a spiritual awakening which led to a shift in human consciousness, resulting in the appearance of a new species, Homo occidentalis novus. This purportedly was such a major alteration in human nature that laws were rendered unnecessary, since individuals worked for the common good out of instinct. Within this alternate world, Dienach conversed with wise spiritual guides known as lectors and engaged in philosophical discussions regarding topics such as the nature of time, reincarnation, and the soul. All these experiences had a deep impact on Dienach's worldview after coming out of the coma and have been mystical insights shared by him. While the skeptics say that Dienach's entire account of life in the year 3906 was his hallucination, or a sort of product of his subconscious mind trying to fill up plausibly untraceable gaps in time of his prolonged coma, it is also possible that, based on our knowledge, the brain accounts for creating vivid false memories under certain trauma or neurological distress. Thus, by this line of reasoning, it seems Dienach's visions were imagination constructs rather than lived experience. Then again, the staggering detail and foresight of his descriptions, many of which presaged today's technological advancements and philosophical ideas, naturally kept on igniting long-standing debates on whether Dienach's story was in fact hallucination, some wonderful act of imagination, or a bona fide glimpse of reality. Technological marvels of the future. Paul Amadeus Dienach's account of the future world in 3906 was filled with extraordinary descriptions of technological advancements that far surpassed the imagination of his contemporaries. One of the most striking inventions he described was the Reigen Swag. He claimed this tool was used for education and communication, allowing him to learn about the centuries leading up to the year 3906. The functionality and intuitive design of the Reigen Swage reflect a world where technology served to enhance knowledge and accessibility. Dienach also described architectural marvels in the futuristic supercity of Norfolk, which he claimed was the fourth largest city in the world. He spoke of towering mansions as tall as mountains, hanging gardens, and vast underground cities. Floating structures, such as observatories, shops, and lounges, were a common sight, creating what he referred to as a fairy tale land. These descriptions suggest a society that had mastered energy and material sciences to an incredible degree, integrating advanced technology seamlessly with aesthetics and nature. Such visions evoke parallels to today's futuristic concepts of smart cities and sustainable urban development. Transportation was another field to which Dienach pointed as making advances in 3906. He profiled flying ships that could negotiate vast distances on wings of ease, and floating cities that did not obey the laws of gravity. These innovations suggest that humankind has surpassed the barriers of olden modes of transportation and has now entered an epoch of clean and efficient technologies that possibly defy gravitational pull. His reminiscences in the Valley of Roses, in which he traveled in a flying boat, stress not just the functionality of such inventions, but also the beauty and harmony sought in their creation. This combination of technology into the natural and spiritual elements professes a culture that decorates balance between advancement and harmonious existence. Conversely, Dienach indicated that technological development had reorganized society itself. By 3906, money had become an object of fancy, being replaced by a system of resource distribution based on adequacy rather than anything even distantly approaching scarcity. Except for valuable work in an altruistic service program during those 2 years after formal learning, society demanded no further work from its members. Afterward, most became free to pursue their interests without even the prospect of monetary reward. This vast wealth in technology enabled a society whose material cravings faded away into a focus on intellectual, artistic, and spiritual activities. Such wonders came alive to Dienach, painting strong images of a utopia where life without technology was seen as a descent of human life from a higher experience. Yet, hidden beyond these technological wonders lies a transformation that redefines the very essence of our existence: the evolution of humanity. Paul Amadeus Dienach's visions of the future included not only technological advancements, but also the profound spiritual and biological evolution of humanity itself. According to his account, by the year 3000, an event called the Neville Birch occurred, marking a transformative moment in human history. This phenomenon triggered a dramatic shift in human consciousness, allowing individuals to tap into a vast reservoir of spiritual knowledge. Initially, this evolution came at a great cost. Many of those who experienced the Neville Birch were overwhelmed by the flood of new emotions and knowledge, leading to their deaths. Over time, however, humanity adapted, and by 3382, the first person successfully survived the experience, heralding the rise of a new species, Homo occidentalis novus, or the new Western man. The emergence of Homo occidentalis novus was marked by a complete transformation in human nature and society. Individuals gained a heightened sense of empathy and cooperation, rendering traditional laws and governance systems obsolete. Instead of being driven by greed or competition, humans worked for the collective good, prioritizing art, science, and spiritual fulfillment. This new species represented the pinnacle of human evolution, characterized by a deep understanding of the interconnectedness of all things and a shared commitment to advancing humanity as a whole. Dienach's observations suggested that this shift was not just societal, but intrinsic to human biology and consciousness. This evolution had influenced all of life in the year 3906. By the time greed and selfishness ceased to exist, we had left the notion of wealth behind us. Resources were fairly distributed, and the economy transitioned into a system based on adequacy, in which everyone had what they needed, but very little more. Education was made universal, with an emphasis on both spiritual and intellectual development. People did 2 years of mandatory service when they were young, and were then free to devote themselves to their passions without economic considerations. Such was a Homo occidentalis novus value system, which believed in a primitive utopia of no material wealth and no government or hierarchy. All these axes, Dienach's narrative of this evolutionary leap speaks to the notion of our potential as humans to transcend our current circumstances to an existence utopia of peace, united and reconciliated. All the while, skeptics will argue that he perhaps imagined such things or hallucinated due to sleep deprivation, but it serves as an inspiring reminder of what we are capable of if we committed to cooperation and enlightenment rather than blood and greed. Homo occidentalis novus are more than just. Tomorrow, they'll go to work, collectively, as holistic members of society, contributing to inherent, not imposed, human evolution. True or not, Dienach's vision dares us to envision a future in which human evolution does not merely extend itself as technology, but evolves us into a more expansive spiritual iteration of ourselves. Mystical encounters and the Valley of Roses. Among Paul Amadeus Dienach's extraordinary experiences in the year 3906, his journey to the Valley of Roses stands out as a deeply spiritual and transformative event. The Valley of Roses was described as the spiritual center of the futuristic city of Norfolk, home to the most enlightened philosophers, scientists, and spiritual leaders of the era. Dienach was guided to this mystical place by his friend Stefan, who described it as a haven for those seeking deeper understanding and enlightenment. The valley itself was an otherworldly landscape, adorned with shimmering lights, magnificent temples, vibrant flower bushes, and precious stones, creating an atmosphere of divine serenity and beauty. During his time in the Valley of Roses, Dienach was struck by the profound spiritual insights and philosophical discussions that permeated the environment. The people who lived there were dedicated to exploring the mysteries of existence, the nature of the universe, and the interconnectedness of all life. These individuals, referred to as spiritual elites, represented the culmination of humanity's evolution toward enlightenment, embodying the values of harmony, cooperation, and intellectual curiosity. Dienach was deeply moved by their teachings and the elevated sense of purpose that permeated the valley, which he described as unlike anything he had ever encountered. Dienach had been all too conscious of his nostalgia and yearning as he trailed around the wondrously beautiful and spiritually deep Valley of Roses. Spending more and more time in the valley, he started to remember and yearn for his past life, particularly for his first love, Anna. The flood of emotions he felt reminded him of a promise Anna had made to him an eternity ago, adding fuel to his inner conflict. The spiritual environment of the valley seemed to amplify those feelings and sparked Dienach into contemplating time, reincarnation, and the journey of the soul through lifetimes. The eventual thought that Anna's soul could probably have been reborn in the person of his present companion Sylvia was, therefore, a heightening mystical input to his experience in the valley. Dienach's experiences in the Valley of Roses were then understood as the icon upon which spirituality, philosophy, and intellect were grafted in the future society of 3906. The sacred site served as a monument to the spiritual evolution of humanity, but also as a very private journey of self-discovery and healing for Dienach. To skeptics, his claims may be nothing other than the workings of imagination or hallucination. However, their vivid detail and emotional heft keep raising questions about human growth from the spiritual to the intellectual. For Dienach, therefore, the Valley of Roses was never just a physical place, but rather a heavy chapter in his transformation along the path of time and consciousness. Parallel to modern memory science, Paul Amadeus Dienach's vivid account of time travel and futuristic experiences raises intriguing questions about the reliability of memory, particularly in cases of trauma or prolonged unconsciousness. Modern memory science suggests that our recollection of events is not a perfect recording, but a reconstructive process shaped by our emotions, environment, and subconscious. In Dienach's case, his prolonged coma might have led his brain to fill in the gaps with elaborate narratives drawn from his knowledge, interests, and imagination. This phenomenon, known as confabulation, often occurs in individuals who experience memory loss or cognitive trauma as the brain attempts to make sense of missing time. Studies in psychology have shown how easily false memories can be implanted or constructed, even in healthy individuals. For instance, research by Julia Shaw in 2015 demonstrated that suggestive techniques could lead 70% of participants to vividly recall committing crimes they had never actually committed. In the case of Dienach, the building blocks for his futuristic visions, his interest in philosophy, history, and language, could have been pieced together by his subconscious mind during his coma. The result was a detailed and fantastical narrative that felt real to him, much like the false memories created in controlled psychological experiments. Yet another thoroughly documented phenomenon in neuroscience states that during changed states of consciousness, the human brain tends to create very intense dramatic experiences, be it a near-death experience or a coma. Dienach's crystal hall visions, floating city wonders, and spiritual leaders may have been a bit of hallucinatory trip made extra colorful by his present mental fixations and emotional states. In addition, people who wake up from comas tend to report tremendous alterations of personality or worldview, even as Dienach changed after his own coma. His new tilt towards spirituality and philosophical inquiry could be considered a way to emotionally cope with the trauma of his illness and the loss of his mother during the coma. From the perspective of contemporary memory theory, one can consider Dienach's narrative, yet it is a stark reminder of the very intricate arena that concerns human consciousness. Whether Dienach's stories are mere hallucinations, false memories, or some authentic episodes difficult to capture by present-day cognizance remains an exploration worthy of investigation into memory, imagination, and reality. For Dienach, the story he narrated, or that occurred to him while in a coma, was a life-changing narrative by which he shaped his life and legacy. Be it real or fictive, it continues to raise an array of questions into the puzzling substance of the human mind, and how memory in particular can give rise to a blending of the lines between reality and perception. The historical and literary context of the Dienach story. The story of Paul Amadeus Dienach is not only a tale of futuristic visions and spiritual evolution, but also a narrative with questionable historical and literary roots. According to the accounts, Dienach was a Swiss teacher who lived in Zurich during the early 20th century and later moved to Athens, Greece. However, historical records from Zurich and Athens during that time have no trace of Paul Amadeus Dienach or anyone matching his description. Even his purported diary, which contained his predictions and detailed accounts of his coma experience, was conveniently lost, allegedly seized by Greek military officials. This lack of documentation raises serious doubts about whether Dienach ever existed or if the entire story is a fabrication. Adding to the mystery is the role of Georgios Papachatsis, Dienach's former student, who published the story in 1972, claiming it was a translation of Dienach's diary. However, prior to the publication, the same basic narrative appeared in a series of Greek magazine articles, suggesting that the diary itself might never have existed. Papachatsis was an intellectual with a deep interest in philosophy and spirituality, themes that heavily influenced Dienach's alleged account. It is possible that Papachatsis created the story as a fictional treatise on humanity's potential for spiritual and intellectual evolution, using the narrative framework of a mysterious coma and time travel to make the ideas more compelling. Literary parallels also suggest the possibility of creative inspiration rather than historical authenticity. Paul Amadeus Dienach's story bears strong parallels to H.P. Lovecraft's The Shadow Out of Time, written in the 1930s. In Lovecraft's story, the protagonist undergoes a mind swap and is time-traveled to awaken in another timeline and learns of an advanced civilization. The details are different, but the essential core, coma, time travel, philosophical exploration, is very much the same. This has caused some to speculate that the story of Dienach himself might have been inspired, either directly or indirectly, by Lovecraft's work or other such speculative fiction from that time period. Given the lack of independent support for the existence of Dienach, along with the literary and philosophical milieu of the time, it is likely that the story is more of an imaginative allegory than a historical account. Nonetheless, even if it were a work of fiction, its subjects of human evolution, spirituality, and technological advancement are nevertheless intriguing. The narrative has continued to engross readers and ignite arguments about the murky boundary between historical truth, literary invention, and the human capability to transcend temporal horizons. Paul Amadeus Dienach's story, whether he was a real person or a fictional middle-class construct in writing, nonetheless raises questions about the human condition. Beyond its origins, the tale continues to spark debates, leaving us with more questions than answers. The legacy of Paul Amadeus Dienach. The story of Paul Amadeus Dienach has long captivated those who hear it, not only for its extraordinary claims, but also for its ambiguous nature. On one hand, Dienach's vivid descriptions of life in the year 3906, his predictions of technological advancements, and his philosophical musings suggest a depth of insight that seems improbable for a man living in the 1920s. On the other hand, the lack of historical evidence for Dienach's existence, combined with the conveniently lost diary and dubious origins of the story, casts significant doubt on its authenticity. The narrative continues to straddle the line between fact and fiction, leaving its legacy open to interpretation. Supporters of Dienach's story often point to the remarkable accuracy of some of his predictions, such as the rise of handheld devices, space exploration, and even the threats of nuclear war. These details are difficult to dismiss entirely, especially given that many of them align closely with advancements made long after the 1920s. However, skeptics argue that such predictions could be the result of educated guesses or retroactive interpretations, where modern readers project contemporary developments onto Dienach's vague descriptions. Additionally, without verifiable documentation of his existence, it becomes increasingly likely that Dienach's story is a work of speculative fiction rather than a factual account. Georgios Papachatsis must take his place in writing Paul Amadeus Dienach's legacy. Papachatsis, who first brought the story to the public in 1972, had alleged he was translating Dienach's diary and offered scant proof to establish its authenticity. Some critics have observed that the themes of the narrative, the spiritual progress of mankind, progress in technology, the nature of philosophical inquiry, closely mirror Papachatsis' interests as a thinker, leading to the conclusion that he had simply invented the story as a work of literature or philosophy. Moreover, The comparisons between Dienach's narrative and earlier works of speculative fiction like H.P. Lovecraft's The Shadow Out of Time lend credence to the assertion that the story was born more from the creative than the historical. However, its origins aside, Paul Amadeus Dienach is the legacy that remains, a living testament to the possibility of human greatness and the complex web of consciousness. Whether it is regarded as a true account, an elaborate hoax, or a philosophical allegory, the story continues to provoke arguments about the nature of time, memory, and spirit. It encourages readers to ponder what exists outside the scope of human comprehension and offers a glimpse of a future molded by cooperation, enlightenment, and technological advancement. In this sense, the legacy of Paul Amadeus Dienach transcends fact or fiction, embodying instead a bold signifier of humanity's ambitions and imagination. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this mind-bending journey into the story of Paul Amadeus Dienach, don't forget to like this video, comment your thoughts on whether you think his story is fact or fiction, and subscribe for more fascinating content like this. And hey, don't stop here. Click on the next video on your screen to keep exploring the mysteries of time, memory, and the future. See you in the next one.